I'm going to share with you, usually I don't share with my students what I taught when I taught high school. And then after a little bit of time, when they're used to me and the way I bounce around and they kind of do things, and I say I was a drama teacher in high school, then they go, now it makes sense. She's always performing. Okay. So please let me know if I'm talking too quickly because of the mask and my Australian accent. It might be difficult for you to understand me. So, that's important. So just kind of let me know. Okay, so I taught in high schools for a long time in Tasmania, which is a state that sort of often gets forgotten and left off the map of Australia. But that's where I was, and I got really intrigued by something that I was observing in my classroom. It raised questions for me because in my drama classroom, you went so you're interested in drama theatre. Yes. You are always working with people's brains. It's up the front. You're asking them to think on their feet. You throw something at them and they've got to think and come up with a response. And so I improvise. So you really see their minds working. And so I think, wow, this young man, what a brain. It's like, how did you come up with these wonderful ideas and so on so quickly? And then I find out that this very talented drama student was actually failing in English. And I thought I taught English as well. And I came to reflect on my own practice, and I taught drama and English as if I was two different people completely. So drama I taught in a very creative kind of fashion, the sort of like I had in my head what I was going to do, and I would throw it out the window depending on what was coming from the students. In English, I had a set agenda and I worked through that set agenda. I didn't apply the same levels of creativity to what I was doing in the English classroom. But I sort of reflected on why is it that somebody that I think has a lot of intelligence is not performing in their other more formal types of classes. So I thought, I've got to find out. How do I find out? So I started reading up on gifted education. I ended up doing a research project investigating that in the context of my students in my school. That was a master's level thesis. When I finished that, I thought, I haven't actually answered my question so much as found a whole lot more questions. I need to know more. Where can I find out more? And so at that time, it was kind of pre-email. So now we know it was a long time ago. In the previous century. So I ended up going to the United States and stayed there for 3 years and did my PhD there. And I was looking at gifted students who are underperforming in the classroom, but not in a sense of blaming the student, but trying to find an alternative way to understand what their range of capacities were and how we could harness those capacities. So in a sense, that experience that I had, not even as somebody who was an academic where they were on a 40-40-20, which we used to 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% governance, which hardly anybody actually does those figures, 40-40-20. It's more like 60, 25, 102, and so on. So before that, I was stimulated by a question, a strong question that I had arising from the teaching that I was doing. So that's kind of relevant. Now, the other thing is people say to me, have you been to Malaysia before? Yes, I've been to Malaysia before. My first time in Malaysia was about 25 years ago, something like that, maybe even a little bit longer. And I was doing some work for the Malaysian Department of Education, and I did workshops with teachers. They were English teachers, so teachers who were teaching English in high schools here in Malaysia. So I did a one-day workshop here in Kuala Lumpur and a 4-day workshop in Malacca, which was very pleasant, I must say. So that was my first experience of Malaysia. And I have to share a little funny story about myself here. Like I arrived, and I have to say I've never heard of durian. I arrived at the hotel to check in, and there was a little sign on the bench where I was checking in. Durian's not allowed. I thought, I wonder who these durians are. They're not allowed to come into the hotel. You know, maybe they're robbers or some dreadful people, and so on. So then I quietly asked, who are the durians? It's like, who? What? It's like, so they took me. Now, we had a conversation the other day online about durians, because one of our colleagues there, Tom, he wants me to bring him back some durian chocolate. And he's put in his order. And I was at the supermarket at the weekend, and you never guess what I saw in Woolworths, and I have never seen it before. It was an omen. It was a precursor to this trip. It was a durian. It's like I had to take a photo and send it to Tom. It's like, forget the chocolates, I'm not bringing any. Just go to Woolies and buy yourself a durian. They only had one. Oh, is that somebody online that they?
Yeah.
Excited about durian.
Somebody was excited about the durian.
In Malaysia, this is because it was actually grown in Thailand. I noticed on the thing. But anyway, so that was my first experience of your wonderful country. Absolutely wonderful. I had a terrific time. My next one, and this is relevant, my next trip was to direct a Scrabble tournament in Penang mainland. And it was so Malaysians are very good at Scrabble. So did you know that there was this international Scrabble tournament scene? And following that, so I came and did that and did some tourism that Gabriel's always saying I have to do lots of tourism. I said, you have to give me a schedule where I can go shopping and that would work. I did that, and then a few years later in 2003, I directed the World Scrabble Championships, which were held in Kuala Lumpur. So we'll revisit Scrabble later on, if I ever finish that. I always talk too much and so on. And then my next trip to Malaysia was to visit KBU when Wollongong was looking at this collaboration with Paramount to become part of higher education in Malaysia. And that was a fantastic experience. And I was very impressed, and I gave everybody, sort of 5 stars and so on, and that was part of the process of studying this. So with COVID intervening, I haven't been for a while, so that's why I'm very excited to be here and to be able to share these ideas with you based on the kinds of experiences that I've had in 30 years of work at the university. So I'm currently Pro Vice Chancellor Global. I used to teach, when I was teaching students still, I taught educational psychology. So that's kind of my discipline background. Okay, so let's, I have to turn it on. Turn it on, turn it on. Ah, there we go. Ah, there we go.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
It is going to be good. Yeah, it's not, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Oh, we've gone too far now. Okay. So in the university settings, the 40-40-20 that I was talking about, right, is 40% teaching, 40% research, and 20% governance and service. And as I said, typically, it's very rare, right, for that to happen. Because what happens? Right, you all know you're kind of busy. You have a lecture scheduled at 10 o'clock tomorrow. You've got all of this research you'd like to do, but you've got students who'll be sitting waiting for you to do this tomorrow, or to get feedback on their assessments, or to talk to you about a particular issue that they have, etc., etc., etc. So there's it's very responsive. Okay, so that kind of tends to, and that happens. Now, so one of the, I mentor a lot of young academics. And one of the things that we do in the one-on-one is to work out how we fit research into that, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed by that. So there are different techniques that I suggest to help with that. And then there's this whole area, because there's the kind of governance administrative kind of world that you occupy, all of those things, going to 700,000 meetings and so on, and all of those kinds of things that need to be done as well. There's a kind of an imperative that needs to be done by last week. That's, how often do we hear that? And then service. So what do you do out there in the community in terms of your own discipline area? So many of you may find that what you do is if you're into drama, as I was, you might work with the local theatre group and give your time there. I used to also direct lots of Scrabble tournaments, which had nothing to do with my work, but it was, sort of about community involvement, and sometimes they come together. So in a sense, what people often talk about in relation to how can we fit research into an academic workload is to talk about this teaching research nexus, to understand that they're not separate agendas, but they actually complement each other. So I'm kind of interested, just very quickly, in what you understand by that term, teaching research nexus. And where does governance and service come into that? I am going to give you an example later on of somebody who's kind of done that. So teaching research nexus, but it might be teaching, research, practice, service, governance, sort of like bringing them together. So for you, what does it mean? What do you understand when I say teaching? You all came. Did you come because you thought I was giving away durian chocolate? Oh, yes. Any thoughts? Anyone putting anything in the chat online?
Is it basically doing research based on our practice of teaching?
It can be, yes, yes. There's no right and wrong answer. This is the point. So I'm not going to say no to anything unless you say it's taking advice of the name. So any other thoughts about what I mean by this? Yes?
With the teaching and research, it's really that whatever that you do, implementations that are such as the and so on, it can be measurable, the outcomes. The outcomes can be monitored and recorded, and also the impact of what we have implemented. But can be produced research.
Okay. So now talking about reflecting on your teaching practices and bringing them into a kind of a research environment. Okay. I'm going to. If that works now, it's a bit delayed. Okay, let's try that. Okay. So now this is where you all get a chance to go. Oh. Okay. So what does your academic workload look like? 85% teaching, 120% governance and service. Okay. Have a quick chat to the person next to you. Turn around, it's there. You know, how do you spell this? Let's leave it there. You don't have to add up to 100. Okay. So in terms of teaching, what kind of percentage do you think of your time you spend on teaching and teaching related activity? How much for you?
I think for most of them, it's about 50% of
About 50% of time
but
teaching.
because we have like 3 semesters in the year, so it's like teaching all the time.
So teaching all
and
the
it's about window, it's going to be a window for research.
Yeah.
And they are doing like, you know, from your practice, like I feel education, teaching performance, not that. I use my students as my to answer my survey questions so that I can write something up.
Yeah.
Small, but it doesn't, it's not big, it's not national, it's just more of the teaching outcome, I just practice the question.
Okay.
It's all doable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have that time to go somewhere.
Yes. Yes. So it's about. I mean, that's a really good point in terms of you spend this time on teaching. You use your students as your participants, and so on. But you have a concern about how you scale it up, so that you can hit the higher journals. So it's like you've got that scale up factor, and we'll see how people have scaled up. Okay, so I've got some examples. So that's a critical issue, that idea of taking your classroom teaching and the research that you do with that to the next level. Okay, so you don't get overwhelmed. Okay, I don't want to belabor the point too much. So when we think about how it's really easy to be negative. And so, oh, you know, I don't have time for this and I'm exhausted and so on. Because if you look at that, I deliberately, you know, chose that photo. There's intravenous coffee required, is what it says, doesn't it? Okay. But what brings you joy? And I'm not really, did that sort of Marie Kondo, you know, joy decluttering? Yeah. Well, I kind of stole that, right? So how do you declutter all of the competing demands and focus on what brings you joy? So let's have some examples. What brings you joy in your work? Okay.
Success.
Student success?
Success, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Student success, what else?
We sitting student to end up doing class. For example, when I teach design, when first started with design class, you cannot know anything. Then probably the middle of the end, grow so much.
Fantastic. So student improvement over time, that you can observe that and see that. And sometimes when you're in the learning process, it's difficult, isn't it, to actually realise where you come from.
The thing about that is that I have to try several ways of explaining. But students are very different from each other. This student may need different kind of approach, whereas another student different kind of approach. And to see that kind of approach that you find the student kind of knowing.
Okay, great. All right, so who hasn't shared anything? What brings you joy?
Class, people to express themselves and coming out of their shell.
Okay, fantastic. So it's a lot of things about students.
And my colleagues also bring me joy.
They told him to say that. Because, you know, I think it's fantastic, absolutely fantastic that so many of you thinking about joy is, you know, sort of like seeing the lights go on in the students' eyes when they get something, when they succeed, when they struggle through something and suddenly it becomes clear that you know that it's made a difference. It's that one email that you get. So often in my mentoring, say to the academics, say to the academics, keep a file on your computer. And every email that you get from a student that is, you know, an unsolicited email that says, thank you so much, I wanted to just thank you because you've made such a difference to me. Or a colleague says, I popped into your class the other day and I thought it was amazing what you were doing with those students. Keep those, put them in your self-affirmation. It's not that you're affirming yourself, but it's a reminder. So when you feel it's like the grind and the frustration and so on, you can go to that and remember how your colleagues sort of made you feel good about what you do. Kind of confirm that you're in the right place and you're making a difference. Right? Because negative voices often overwhelm. So I want us to kind of remember that idea of being, that's where we get our energy from. Right. So from our students, I know that often I'll go into a class, used to when I was teaching. I mean, I'm going to come out of this and think, wow, wasn't that fantastic? Not because I think I've done a fantastic job, but because of our ability to be able to be in a room and kind of share ideas and so on. I find that so stimulating, and so on. So, you know, I think that kind of, you can be, it doesn't matter how tired you are, that gives you that kind of recharges your batteries, and kind of gives you that energy and commitment. So the little kind of folder to remind you of those things is important as well. So that's all part of this piece. So look, there's a lot of meanings. So I did sort of want to come into this about what the research teaching nexus does. So I stole this diagram from here, but this is kind of is really showing that circularity. So we look at research enriches teaching, teaching enriches research. Right? So that's the kind of what they're saying, and this community of scholars, right, is really important as part of that process. So the colleagues, you know, there's that kind of social and emotional kind of support they give you, but there's also the way you're in the coffee room, or you know, you're down bringing something to eat, and you're in a queue and you get chatting to somebody, my colleague who's in a completely different faculty, and you're talking about things, and research projects are born that way in queues at the bank or the coffee shop or in the hallway, or at a meeting that's sort of a kind of university-wide meeting or something. You meet somebody. Most of my research projects are around collaborations that seem to come from nowhere. So kind of being alert to oh. Okay, I learned that's important. And this is, you know, teaching enhanced by research. You're learning research skills, you're engaging in research. So there's this kind of cogs that are happening here. So I'm going to pick up on, and I don't know how far, I'm thinking that this one will extend beyond today. I haven't got very far with it in terms of working with it, but my idea was to, having done set this off face to face, that I would have some online sessions between now and the end of the year, where I was hoping to bring in more of this to kind of build on this component. Right, so these are the three areas. Research that informs in teaching, teaching that stimulates new research agendas for you. So that kind of takes your point really, you know, sort of I could do it here, but then how do I scale it up? You know, so that's kind of going from a research project to a whole research agenda. But that's the big thing. And then this idea of, well, your own practice and how research is done in practice, particularly arts-based humanities, you know, these kinds of areas that you're in. So it's, I think in the arts and humanities, researching is very much, sorry, brain just absolutely went totally blank. I have no idea what I was going to say. So it must have been a complete lie, because otherwise I would have remembered it, right? So apologies for losing my train of thought, but let's move on and see where we go. Okay, so the first component, research that informs in teaching. So here we have the kind of, when people think about university research, what do they think about? They think about the sciences, don't they? It's really easy. I'm trying to come up with a vaccine for COVID-19. That might be a sort of a very practical problem, but I'm probably, I might be an epidemiologist or a chemist or a, sort of whatever, medical researcher and so on. It's really easy to see how, if I'm an epidemiologist and that's what I research, that's what I teach at the university, epidemiology. So obviously in disciplines where the field is moving, sort of like the research informs the practice. I could think if we're looking at design, right? Now your media, multimedia design, game development and so on, world class what you do here. So that kind of, that is a field that obviously changes rapidly, doesn't it? New technologies, kind of mind-blowing to me, sort of, it's like where we've gone in a short space of time in terms of the technology that we have. Hi, everybody online. Hope you're kind of still with us. Go get another cup of coffee, put your feet up, stroke the cat, or whatever. Tom, I hope you're feeding my cat. Okay, fine. So, sort of, it's like, in that sense, you have to, if you're teaching in that field, you have to remain up to date, don't you? What's the new thing? How is this tool, right? And that kind of practice, keeping up to date in your discipline, in your practice, is something that informs your teaching, because it's about, and all of creative art and that kind of work is about finding solutions to a problem. You're looking for an answer for something. So there is a research element in creative practice that we need to think about how that can be applied to more traditional types of research outputs. And it's a tension. It's a tension that's continuing to develop. So this is your chance to tell me about some of the ways in which your research or your practice, right, informs your teaching. You might want to kind of share with people around you for a couple of minutes. Give me a chance to, and people online, I'd really like you to think about this as well. And you can put some things in the chat. There is a chat.
Yes, there's a chat. Any question that comes in, we will read it out. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. All right. Do we have any examples on screen in the chat? You're not. Put the cup of tea down and let us know. All right. Examples. Yes.
I have been practicing in medium areas. Doing a lot of practicals as well as problem solutions like machine practical. And what I see is that there is a lot of research that opens my mind up on the industry space. So what happens that I used to think back on the classroom. When I think back to the classroom, what I see is that of course the classroom is all about textbooks and books. What I see is that when I relate with students with textbooks, I also find that I'm able to bring what I have been practicing to students to interaction or discussions on the picture. So the students' feedback and understanding is sometimes I can find some ideas of such come up. That is my take in this field.
Okay.
Because you don't get to what we do. If you prepare the classrooms, it comes up with the statements. From there. The only thing is that we are looking at how to put that.
Okay. Fantastic. Fantastic. I'm going to, yes.
I'm currently doing a research to study about how the local media it has very xenophobic sentiment on foreign workers in this country. And the recommendation and the finding is about emphasizing media ethics reporting to solve this issue. And it so happened that I also teach media law and ethics. So this research finding can be included in how I
Right.
enhance my teaching.
Okay, now I'm intrigued by this example. Because, so researching media ethics in the reporting on foreign workers in this country. And that's, sort of like what you're doing. Then when you're in the classroom, you've got a couple of dynamics happening here. So certainly in terms of it's obviously something that is uppermost in people's minds. Okay, so it has that kind of currency value. It's up to date. It's what people are concerned about. It's not something that belongs in the past and nobody's thinking about anymore. So I think that currency is really important. But you've got another thing happening there, haven't you? Because when you use your own research as an example for your students to get a point across, right? You're personalising it for them. Certainly, there is an element where you have this kind of raised credibility. Obviously, we've got this kind of fantastic lecturer because she's doing all of this research. But there is another element. You're communicating that this is the important part of learning, right, to students, because the skills of research are something that we should be embedding in our teaching and learning from the minute students sort of walk in the door. And how do we develop those skills in students across their degree, and how do we map them so that we know that when they graduate, that they are truly independent learners who can look at problems and try to work out solutions for them. So thank you. I think that's an excellent example. So media ethics. Any other examples? How are they going on this chat there?
Still a bit quiet.
Still a bit quiet.
I'm just trying to be politically correct. Not very quiet.
They're thinking so much they haven't got around to that. I'm going to just tell them a bit of this with we're talking a lot, can't we? I'm going to put you all on the spot now. Everybody is going to say something, all right? Just very quickly, because perhaps I should have done this earlier, but I'm going to do it now because I want to get some sense of the range of disciplines in here. So you don't have to give me a lot, just tell me what area, what's your discipline? And so I'm going to start with the gentleman here. What's your discipline?
I do business.
Business?
Marketing.
Marketing?
Management.
Okay. Now, that's really interesting to me, marketing. Because, I mean, obviously marketing is a huge thing for the university. We want to get the students in through the door, don't we? So it's like because we know that we have a great product, and we need to make sure people know about it. And it's interesting how that field has shifted, hasn't it? Sort of it's like from traditional marketing ideas to the way that the students, potential students, get their information now. And so on. Has the focus, this is a question, has the focus shifted from mum and dad telling you what you're going to study and where you're going to go to other influences? And the kind of that digital world that so many of our students inhabit. They're really interesting. Thank you for being here. Yes? Sorry?
Sociology.
Social?
Sociology.
Oh, sociology. Again, sort of it's like currency is really important, isn't it? There are burning issues that kind of repeat themselves, but the examples of kind of, I mean, we have a huge one at the moment, don't we, globally, right, is the Supreme Court in the United States of America and their two recent decisions. Now, when you take a very, very conservative right-wing Supreme Court, 9 people who kind of can undo the work of a generation or two in terms of gender issues, and but also gun control. So there's really interesting kind of those influences. It's really important. Yes.
Additional.
Sorry, it's law. Law. Okay. All right. Fantastic. And again, very specific. I only discovered this recently when I was trying to get our law, our Bachelor of Law, at Dubai, and discovered you can't do it. Because of the, sort of the way the law degrees are structured so much. It's easier for British universities to kind of teach law all over the world, but Australian universities don't do it because of the rules in Australia around law. Very interesting, but lots of burning questions there too in terms of law. Yes.
I'm from School of Communication and it's visual communication.
What kind of communication?
Visual communication.
Oh, visual communication. Okay, so you're going to critique mine. Take my PowerPoint slides, are you? Yeah.
It's all right.
And so far, I tried
Just be honest.
to make them relevant. I do remember when PowerPoint first came in, so we used to have the overhead transparency. Overhead transparencies, I used to use a lot of cartoons. I find that I use so many cartoons now because I use cartoons to kind of break up the text, right? Give people a rest from reading. and so on. But with PowerPoint, we kind of grab so many images to get your ideas across, and so on. And, you know, sneakily use design ideas to kind of work out what it's like on them. I know what I like that. I spend now this much time on the content and this much time on making it look good. So, yeah, so kind of an interesting area and some interesting questions there. For example, have you done the research? Have you seen the research on the impact of irrelevant pictures on content? Huh? It actually, it's part of work done in cognitive load theory. It says, you know, sort of like you only enhance the cognitive processing of the content if the images that you have on screen actually complement, right, and actually reinforce the cognitive content, what you want students to take from this. Right?
When you prepare your context, it must be relevant. Content is like things. Some people do a lot of text, a lot of irrelevant pictures. So it makes the cognitive that we don't more longer to understand.
Yeah.
What you have is actually what you
Thank you. Yeah, that's actually it. Yeah. So, but you know, when you think about it, isn't it interesting? Because that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It's like it really makes sense, and yet there is theory and research behind it that says this is what's going on. Too many distractions. Kind of the choice of where to look, what to engage in. So you don't have pretty pictures of mountains, you know, when that's irrelevant. And here is an irony. Last time I sat in on a research presentation where somebody was talking about this, they actually had irrelevant slide background. That I found, I wouldn't have found distracting, except because of the content. I found it very distracting. It's like, well, they're telling me that I need to make sure that the visuals enhance the content, but that visual's got nothing to do with the content that they've got here. So it's like my brain, it's like, went off in hundreds of different directions. Very interesting work. And
my field is digital media.
Digital media. Okay, fantastic. So again, lots of need for you. So that's such a rapidly moving field. You know, I thought I was so hip, right up to date when I got on Facebook, and now I know only oldies like me really are on Facebook, you know, sort of now, because it's all TikTok and it's interesting, Facebook, but I look at memories. I don't have time for Instagram and Twitter and so it's like I think I spend too much time on Facebook, and I keep Facebook because of international friends and knowing what they're up to. But look at the memories, and when it first came out, it was just about text. So you kind of, I have all of these when you go right back. Is on her way to Malaysia would have been what I would have posted back in 2009 or whatever it was when I joined Facebook, right? Now this trip is check-in and Aruba is at Sydney Business sort of lounge. Excited to be escaping the rain and going to our Malaysian campus. Picture of Malaysia, you know, so it's like so very, very kind of rapidly moving. And now I'm seeing too people shift from just static photos to lots of videos as well. So constantly.
Yeah, it's good for me as well, even though the age difference is quite huge. But I have to dive into their world. This TikTok, Instagram, what else we have, all this new media, right? In order to make sure they understand what they actually need to do over there instead of just be part of it and contribute to the content. So we have to give them in order to understand.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to go over to the man in the orange mask. Sorry? Oh, I see computing. Okay, yeah. Combination of accent and it's like plus bad theory. Well, what can I say? And your friend. Oh, animation and visual effects. I have a friend who lives in Los Angeles. She works for Pixar. I went to watch her work one time. It was really interesting. So they were doing some work for one of the feature cartoons, and she was going to have to draw bears, and so they all go to the zoo for the day, kind of observe and draw bears, and so on to get ready for the character development. And so on.
But mine is not 2D, mine is more on the 2D.
2D animation. Okay. That's the most, yeah. I haven't got the animations. I have one. Watch the animation. Yes. Engineering. Okay. I think I remember that from what you were saying about how that kind of impacts on thinking. Yes?
My area is data science.
Data science.
Oh, data science. Okay. Perfect. Oh,
Used to be biochemistry.
yep.
Now it's more towards medication administration.
Yep.
And anything under the sun. I just think that there's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of questions unanswered.
Yep.
So very much into interdisciplinary.
Yep.
And any problems, I think it can be a research.
Yep. Fantastic. Gavin?
Used to be hospitality, food and beverage, that's my discipline, but now teaching and learning.
Yep. Fantastic. So both Han and Gabriel are examples of people that bring in that third element in the nexus. And you'll see that one of the people that has done a video for me kind of has had that same trajectory of starting in a discipline that's led to a question, that's led to expertise development, that then's taken an into a governance role. So it's sort of that's become circular in that way. My creative friend here.
Hello everyone, my name is John. I'm from School of Communication and Creative Arts. I study performing arts, drama and theatre. This is my lecture, by the way. From my university that I studied before. Here I teach entertainment arts, acting, what do you call that? Film.
All right, fantastic. Okay, and I love your image. Oh, yes.
Okay, I'm Lucina. Now he's my boss. My program leader, so it's the leader. That's natural.
No, you're not just an expert.
Even I know her and her work and your impact. Thank you.
And I do drama investigation. I had big research in this in environmental shops, and that's what my research as well.
Yeah.
Give joy to teaching was giving joy. Yeah. Through teaching of English, for some subjects. So we were training teachers to teach English with joy.
Yeah.
That was my
Using drama.
is the drama.
Yeah.
Marketing, business theater. So that was also the research that I did. Study.
Fantastic, fantastic. And your part.
Not from entertainment arts though. I'm Melina from the same school, from creative arts. My discipline is intercultural communication and public relations. But I've done a number of research with my colleagues, interdisciplinary, marrying the entertainment arts elements into communication.
Okay, and there is a kind of an important link. This is where, sometimes you are talking more about the questions that interest you in that sort of intercultural communication and so on. And we've got people sitting who are interested in marketing and so on. It's like sometimes it's different disciplines, but kind of the questions are floating in the same direction. They swirl in the ether and come together and you have a new collaboration form. I think we need to be alert to those kinds of things as well. Yes.
Hi, my name is Susie from School of Communication and Creative Arts as well. I studied public relations and mass communication. So I'm currently doing the research as well on corporate branding. Still going.
Branding.
Rebranding.
Oh, rebranding.
Yeah.
This, it's real marketing sort of end product, end user research informing what they might, yes, lots of possibilities. Ethics.
I'm not the school of communication, but my background is
Sorry?
psychology.
Oh, psychology. Okay.
Actually, some of your work previously. The projects I did before, because I done a lot of work on gifted children. So that was one case that we had in my previous institution that we wanted to try how the student. So we listened, remember that if I didn't try this way, we wanted to try it was at least so we put some of the words that can solve especially when it comes to choosing languages.
Yeah, I was going to talk about it, but briefly. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And it's interesting. There are 2 degrees that I think at university are very specific: law and psychology. And I think those 2 degrees, people who do those degrees have the kind of the smallest number of people that actually go and practice the actual thing that they, so there are a lot of people who've got law degrees that get jobs where they're not lawyers. But they take that kind of the skills that they develop as part of a law program in terms of researching things, being able to take lots of tests, make sense of them, answer questions. They're often in business and sort of all the place. And psychology is the same. It's sort of anything to do with human beings. You find people that study psychology in those roles. How important is psychology in marketing questions? For example, there are lots of connections with maybe our Canadian colleagues.
I'm Andrew. I'm teaching VR-related subjects, especially CSR, personal responsibility.
Okay, Okay, social responsibility, PR, public relations.
Yeah, it's under education, so I work on projects related to
Single mothers.
yeah, and some of the projects actually are under the state government. So I work closely with NGOs.
Okay, okay, fantastic, fantastic.
Hi, I'm Sarah. My background is media production. And I'm teaching quite a little bit of theoretical and practical on content creation for all kind of media.
Okay, okay, fantastic, fantastic.
I'm Dr. Tan. I started with media studies and kind of like confused with media studies. And I do research about creative industry, but now I'm more onto religious anthropology.
You've had an epiphany. It's interesting, I've got a couple of colleagues that have kind of made that kind of shift as well. Sometimes it's the things that attract you in one discipline, within the discipline. And when you reflect, on you and that kind of central idea, it can take you into other disciplines that may seem disparate, but actually they make a lot of sense to you in terms of your own personal journey. Is there anybody that wants to share any examples from the screen?
Still a bit quiet, the screen. Yeah.
All right. They're very passive over on there. That's fine. We'll move on. Okay, I'm going to give my voice a rest. This is actually one of my colleagues from back in my School of Education days. This was her area is access to higher education, particularly interested in children who are first in family going to, or people who are first in the family to go to university, and so on. So this is about looking at the kinds of questions that are raised for you and how you shift them up to a big agenda. She got promoted to professor on the basis of this work. So it starts as a reflection on the composition of her classrooms and how certain students really struggle to be able to stay in the classroom because of their background circumstances, to a national research project with huge funding and promotion to professor. So it's 10 minutes, but she's really good. So I thought it was worth. So I should. It's going to be a big bang here. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Stop that. Stop. Go back. Okay, what did I do? Oh, there it is. Huh. Okay. Okay. Oh, thank you. Oh,
Yeah.
oh.
is the interlude.
Share YouTube. Share YouTube.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Now we're going to hear that explosion again.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by asking if you would please turn to the person on your right and now turn to the person on your left. What if I was to say to you that one of you would not be here at the end of the evening? Well, you might wonder what terrible thing was about to happen. You might even be a little bit apprehensive. But at the end of the evening, you would go home to your family and life would go on. I promise. But let's rethink that statement, but this time in the context of a first-year lecture theatre. As you sit there about to embark on a new journey, perhaps you're a long way from home. Maybe you're the first in your family to go to university, or maybe you've left a job to be there. How might you feel then? 30 years ago, when I started university, this turn to the left, turn to right directive was commonly used in oversubscribed courses to weed out those weaker students. Thankfully, universities have moved on a lot since then, and their role in society has changed. Traditionally, universities were seen as being for the elite. They were effectively a gatekeeper into the top professions. But since the 70s, we have increased our student population. It's been multiplied over 6 times. We've now have more and more people taking advantage of this increased access. Some call this the massification of higher education. Now, there have been both positive and negative reactions to this massification. On the one hand, this open access is seen as leading to the curriculum being dumbed down and our graduates leaving university underqualified for the field. On the flip side, though, this increased access is heralding great benefits, a chance of a better job with more stable income, and perhaps for some, breaking an intergenerational cycle of poverty. Well, I actually think that both these perspectives are a little too simplistic. I prefer to focus on understanding how the students themselves reflect on this access. I'm curious to know what motivates them and how they manage this access. I want to know how we can support them, and I want to know how it is that they are motivated. Now, some of you in the audience might be a little skeptical of this. I work in a university and I research university students. Quite unlike my colleagues here tonight, who you'll hear from, some of whom may have to wrangle rodents, locate exotic fruits, spend long hours in the lab extracting scientifically validated data. But being what we call an insider researcher is perhaps not as simple as it sounds, as we have to adopt a hypercritical lens on our data, and sometimes we even have to focus that lens on our own employer. Sorry, Vice-Chancellor. I also try to tease out the stories that illustrate the challenges that students face and hold these up as an unflinching mirror to the sector. I want to challenge dominant perceptions of students, particularly those who are first in the family. Now, one such story is that of Elle. Elle kindly agreed to participate in a number of interviews throughout her degree. Elle was 33 and the mother of three children when she joined our study, and she was in the second year of her degree. Like many mature age students, Elle's decision to come to university was based on a significant life event. In Elle's case, it had been a marriage breakup. Like other first-in-family students, this decision to come to higher education was already reverberating amongst her family, heralding great plans and possibilities for the future. However, Elle's study had not been uninterrupted, largely due to family and financial issues. Elle had to drop to part-time studies because the subjects that she wanted to do were not in school hours. She also had to move back to her parents' home as she was no longer able to afford household expenses. Despite financial problems, Elle was volunteering at a local not-for-profit organization. The organization was supporting young people who had disengaged from school. Elle enjoyed the job because she felt she could identify with the young people, having not done so well at school herself. When Elle was asked how university had changed her, she paused and said that it was not just the acquisition of new knowledge, but more importantly, it was the development in her own self-confidence and self-reliance that she most appreciated. Now, Elle's story is unique, but it shares many common themes heard in conversations with students over the years. These are stories of triumph over adversity, resilience, and bold courage. Financial issues feature strongly in these stories, and that's probably not that surprising, as nearly 50% of our students worry about their financial future. And a further 1 in 7 do go without food. For first and family students like Elle, there are many other obstacles, such as not feeling like they belong at university. Other groups, such as those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, those who are from regional remote areas, also have high dropout rates. Now, of course, there's a myriad of reasons why students drop out of university. And as Elle's story attests, the lives of our students are both complex and extraordinary. But it is precisely this complexity that I feel is an untapped resource in our approaches to supporting our students. Too often our learners are defined in terms of what they lack, whether that might be wealth, ability, or knowledge. I prefer to focus on what they have. While universities have become more accessible and the turn to the right, turn to the left directive is no longer commonly used, these unfortunately are not places of equal opportunity for all the diverse range of students that walk through the door. We only have a band-aid solution to the issue of educational retention. Now, this might not be that surprising because many universities, obviously not UOW, are wedded to a very traditional view of students. One only has to Google the term university students to see that images of people like Elle are very much missing from those on display. My research then is exploring how we as a sector can better leverage the life skills and experiences that our learners arrive with to ensure that they succeed. My big idea, if you like, is that institutions radically rethink the problem at hand and to stop asking why it is that students leave university and instead focus on why it is they stay. Based on data collected with students across the whole Australian sector, I've developed a student persistence framework that is based upon the students' cultural capitals and capabilities that they said motivated and sustained them in their studies. This framework is informing practical initiatives that are designed to value and build upon the life experiences of our learners. In our last meeting with Elle, we asked her what it was that had enabled her to keep going, to soldier on, if you like. She paused for a minute and said that it was her unflinching desire to prove others wrong and to disrupt preconceived limitations on what her life would hold for her. The title of my presentation, Educating the Masses, is a deliberate play on words. We don't often think of the term mass in a positive way. Think of mass production, mass consumption. But as Elle's story and the experiences of many other learners indicate, this massification holds many opportunities, not only for learners and institutes, but also for family, society, and broader community. However, to make this work, we really do need to make changes in how we approach and think about difference and diversity. This needs to be viewed and treated as a resource rather than a limitation. This would allow us to walk alongside our students, enabling them to achieve success in their own terms and according to their own circumstances. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. And it's good to leave it. There was a lot in that. But I think the key message is that she saw something. So she was actually teaching predominantly. She came to UOW to teach adult education. So she was teaching people that had to teach adults in a whole other areas usually. Sometimes they were teaching at universities, but often in other components. They might have been doing might have been trainers in businesses or industry or that kind of thing. So it was the content and sort of those experiences, and I love the way that she developed that. So she's got a whole bunch of research and themes that she uses one person to illustrate. And quite often, those of us who are sort of in this field, when we use one example that stands for those common themes of many, it's a very good communication tool in terms of understanding those key challenges and what makes a difference. What for you was the key take-home message? What is one thing that you would take from that her presentation? I think there was a lot in it, but I'm interested to hear what your key take-home message is.
Think of for Sarah, even though she only gave one example, but she understood that she can
Asian markets, large markets, to test trade and get message across.
Yeah, okay, so it's very, I think so this was, I'm sorry, if I can kind of translate, just, sort of, say this was about, yes, there was one example that, she was bringing in the commonality of that across the Australian sector, but it started small. It started in her conversations with adult learners, and the challenges that they were facing and how they had to manage their circumstances and so on in order to be able to succeed. And the focus at the university at the time was a lot of providing remedial services, and that was the way it was it was packaged. It's like, oh, you need extra help. Now, so for particular types of students that she's talking about that she was dealing with, there was a pride factor. It's like you already don't feel as if you belong in a university. And if you have to go somewhere and say, I need additional help, you're feeling even more marginalised and even more like you don't belong. And that made it easier to drop out rather than persist. So her research that grew from those conversations was not on how can we help you, but what makes you stay. And I'm going to come back to that joy. What do you find? What is the joy that you experience at work? Because that's what sustains, right? That's what makes it persist. And that's kind of then her focus is understanding what motivates people to come in the first place and how they actually survive. And cope and manage things, so that the lessons that we learn help us devise more appropriate strategies. So there's a kind of, I think that, I hope you can see too that is an example of how someone's taken a small idea and made it a big idea in terms of, she's now used that nationwide survey, conversations, interviews with students across the entire country who are first in family. She got a big grant to do that, so she had lots of research assistants going out and doing it, and developing a framework from that. Now, a framework that can be picked up and utilised then creates the possibility for further research. So it becomes, a full agenda that sort of dominated the questions that are raised. Okay? Does anybody else want to comment on Sarah? Yeah?
So, the framework you mentioned about the framework of the research or the framework of
no, so it's the things. So from her data, she develops kind of resilience, what a framework to explain why students who are undergoing these challenges actually persist, their motivation, that kind of model. Then it can be applied. Once you have that framework, then that can be applied to other research. Then other researchers across the world interested in the same kind of thing take your framework and use it. You now have an international profile as a researcher, and potentially collaborations that are international. So that's kind of the outcome of the research here, leads to that bigger upscaling.
I like the fact that she focused on what makes them keep going, but then we always focus on people on failing. And so she focused on how do they keep going?
Yeah. So she's doing something different, and so on. And, sort of in a sense, positive psychology. So my psychology friend over here. Okay, just a couple of quick snapshots then from Mother. I would refer, if you haven't seen this, Wattle, It says Wollongong Academy for Tertiary Teaching and Learning Excellence. It's a University of Wollongong initiative. They have lots of activities. Most of them you can watch online and so on. It's about teaching and learning, but it's about research around teaching and learning as well. So as UOW Malaysia KDU employees, you can access this. You can apply to be an associate member of it and have all of this. I did want to, again, there's a number of my colleagues that are talking, just very, Hyperlink's not there. Great. Okay. We're going to type it in, are we? Oh, he's a pal. My friend, this is very quick. It's just a number of researchers, but not all in the School of Education. Many of them are. Just talking about their research interests that come from their teaching and learning practice. So lots of examples.
Everyone loves spreadsheets. Actually, they don't. But check this out. Okay, Monday.com, get started, import from spreadsheet, and...
Well, what is a fantastic vehicle to get people who have a like mind and a passion for teaching and learning to come together. So through events such as the Quick Connections that we're experiencing tonight, allows people across the institution to come together and share their commonalities and talk about things that are of interest to them in teaching and learning.
Research in teaching and learning is around paraphrasing tools and spinners, which is a way that students are using to try and cheat. So rather than learning how to paraphrase themselves, they're doing this text through machines to actually re-engineer language. And I found it is actually detecting when technology won't pick up.
I'm looking at transitions and pathways for students from diverse backgrounds.
I just want to sort of, the previous person, Anne Rogerson, Faculty of Business, now Faculty of Business and Law, a lot of international students, and a lot of issues with plagiarism. Not because and international students were large, sort of cover quite a proportion of that. And so one of the issues that she was dealing with in that faculty, it was nothing to do with their academic ability, but their confidence and so on in terms of how they could take material and make it their own, how to paraphrase and those sorts of things. So her interest came from a practical problem of all of the issues of plagiarism and trying to educate students about plagiarism. And actually has become, again, she's just been promoted to full professor on the basis of her research. It's gone gangbusters because academic integrity is seen now, not just in Australia, but across the world, as the biggest risk that universities face. I can give you one example. of a student that we had cheating sites. So cheating sites and a newspaper got hold of the transactions in a particular cheating site and was able to identify the university that the students were studying at who had paid for cheating services and so on. And it ended at UOW. We had a number of names that we had to investigate all of them. We had to rescind the degree of somebody who had graduated. The irony was that it was a student in the Bachelor of Business who was from China. And he had graduated and gone home to China with his bachelor's degree. But the irony was that the subject he cheated in, that he obviously ran out of time and paid somebody to produce an assignment for him in a particular class, was an elective, not one of his core subjects. So he was focusing on his business subjects. His elective was Mandarin. So it was probably that he made the choice, I'll do Mandarin as an elective because I speak Mandarin, so therefore that's going to be an easy subject. I won't have to put a lot of effort into it. He's focused on his bachelor's, things. But then this essay came due in or something, an assignment came due. He didn't have time to do it, so he paid somebody to actually produce this assignment for him. So he ended up filing that something. They rescinded the degree, but they did let him come back to us. Or I don't even know whether he had to come back to Australia, but he did another subject and was able to be re-awarded his degree. So sort of like this academic integrity is, sort of as quickly as we identify the way they're doing it and kind of try to combat technology that they're using to help them figure it. And so she's developed, because there are very few people in Australia researching in that area, she's found a niche area that's really critical to the sector and has been able to lift her profile, and from that you're able to make that scaling up that we were talking about.
So how to incorporate the pedagogy and curriculum to make it more accessible for people who might have a background of university study.
The research that I really want to focus on is assessment practices, in particular assessment practices that are happening in the classroom.
I'm very passionate about my students having real life experiences when they're in their teaching and learning practices. So I get really excited about bringing teachers from the schools into the university to share their expertise, and also bringing our students out of the university setting and into local schools so that they have an idea of what it's really like to be teaching. They can connect that theory and practice in their settings.
What I love to see is students actually start to think themselves. I love to see students actually begin to understand that there are issues that are complex, there's no easy answer, and they have to think it through. That gives me a great job.
An inspirational music, isn't it?
Win at work by competing effectively.
Go away. No, we don't want you. Okay. So I'm going back to. Okay. Oh, well, all right, I'm in a different place. Okay. This is where we've come, people. Okay, so again, you can see the number of people there that have taken particular issues that are part of their teaching practice. And while they start in terms of looking at those for their research in terms of the practice, they can also then, from that scale up. So again, couple of things. There's some examples to that. It wouldn't be. It wouldn't be a presentation by me unless I mentioned myself. So, because I come from an education background, it's not uncommon for people in faculty of education to be interested in their teaching and learning practices. And there are a couple of things that I wanted to just draw to your attention that started in exactly the same way as we saw from Sarah and as we saw from the various people that spoke in that wattle clip. So this was kind of one of those. Professor Sarah Donker was in marketing. I don't know if those of you are in marketing. She's a huge name, particularly in tourism and so on. She's across a whole range of areas. She's an interesting person because she's a top researcher. She actually came from the university from Austria, so she worked in that system, and then came to Australia. Research was fantastic. Teaching and learning, she was getting very negative feedback, a lot of complaints, and so on. So it was really interesting because I wasn't a full professor at that time, but I was asked, because of my teaching and learning expertise, to be her mentor in her teaching and learning practices. So we had lots of conversations about teaching and learning. And we both then got into this dramatic debate about whether, because university, the funding, I taught a first year subject that had 400 students in it, right? So you have to do 2 lectures, 2 hours of lectures and 1 hour of tutorial. That's what the students get. Right? And so it was, you start off at the beginning of the session and in the first session you had 400 people in the lecture theatre. By the time you get to week 13, you had 20 students. They haven't dropped out, they've just decided that they can get the information somewhere else. They rely on their tutorial to get it and do the reading, they do the assigned reading and so on. So we had this conversation about whether that was a problem or not. Or does it mean that the lecture is out of date and we shouldn't have lectures anymore? You can imagine now, because we had to put everything online, it's like the conversations about whether you should just have a talking head, for a 2-hour lecture, captured and put up on a website, please no. It's because I think there is value in attending a lecture, a physical lecture, where there can be sort of, I can stare into your eyes and kind of engage you. Dad says, I relate to you, she relates to me before. So there's that, and I think there is a particular skill that comes from that. That doesn't translate when it's kind of digital. That's sort of different kinds of skill sets. Anyway, so that developed into quite a big study. We didn't go national with it. We had other priorities, but I'm the same. There's so many possibilities that kind of you can't do everything. But I would say one of the surprising things. I mean, you can predict things. Students tend to come to the lecture if there are things that happen at the lecture that they can't get in any other way, if they're related to assessment. So lecture attendance usually goes up if you're going to talk about what you're looking for in the next assignment that's due, right? Up it goes, you know, so there are things. We know on rainy days, lecture attendance goes down. Right? Or, you know, you can't get a park where it's too hard. If they only have one lecture in the day, they're more likely to skip it than if they have other things on. So there are all sorts of things that have very little to do with the quality of the lecture. And that's really an interesting question, isn't it? And one piece of data, and I don't know how widely spread this is, but the one piece of data that from our research that really fascinated me was that students would choose not to go to a lecture if they thought the lecturer was not very good, boring. Spoken a monotone, just goes on and on, sort of like not really making eye contact, those kinds of things. I had a lecturer in psychology when I was an undergraduate that used to write things up on the blackboard. There were blackboards in those days, not whiteboards, with chalk. He'd have the chalk in his hand, he'd walk up and down, reading his notes to you. It's like, I love psychology, I only passed that subject. It's not very engaging. Right? So they choose that. I was like, oh, no, they weigh it up with everything else, but that's a reason not to, that's one of the top reasons not to go to a lecture if they know that the lecture is going to be boring. However, having a fan, and here's where all you fantastic lecturers can go, whew, thank goodness for Wilma's finding here. Being an excellent lecturer is not one of their top reasons for attending. So if you're bad, they'll use that as an excuse not to go. But if you're great, it may not outweigh all of those rainy day decisions, or I've got an assignment for another subject due in this week, or, you know, the weather's great, why don't I go to the beach instead?
Or they have a breakup. Or they had a breakup.
Sorry, or they
had a breakup.
Oh, they had a breakup, relationship breakup. I'll thank you for that important words as well. Okay, so that's one. And the other one that my friend over here said, I primed him to talk about my research around effective teachers. So one of the things and this is again how it's not just about what you teach, but the conversations you have with your colleagues that stimulate questions. So I'm, as my friend here, my psychology friend here indicated, my interest is in gifted kids. It grew from those kids that I had that were not performing at school, but I thought had lots of potential, right, that wasn't being realised or met at school. So I became very interested in that whole area in my work. And so I thought it was very important that when we were training teachers, they should understand the needs of gifted children. Because there is still an assumption, certainly in our system, that if they're gifted, well, they don't need anything. Right? In fact, they can help these kids over here that are struggling. So, and I used to say to my students when I taught this subject, it's like if anybody puts on their assignment that one of the things that they will do to pay for the gifted kids in their classroom is to get them to help the kids that are struggling, I'm going to fail you in that. Because that's bad practice for both students. Because somebody that is gifted cognitively cannot to make leaps. It's like they don't go through stages. With mathematics, take a gifted mathematician. They'll often, it just makes sense to them. They don't know how they got there, quite often. It makes sense. It's just the way the brain works, it's the logic, right? They make those big leaps. Somebody that's struggling can't make those big leaps. Somebody who hasn't had to take tiny baby steps to get somewhere doesn't understand what the baby steps are and can't help. And this person has just as much right to learn something new every day. So conversation, I'm sorry, but it's often the educational sociologists that I have to fight with the most, equity, treat all the students the same, and so on. They're already privileged. They come from privileged backgrounds. My interest has always been all of those bright kids that don't come from privileged backgrounds, that don't have parents that can compensate for what they're not getting at school to develop their talent. So that's kind of where I've really focused. But in my conversations with colleagues, it's, when they will often work against. So they would say it's good practice for a teacher to, at the beginning of the lesson, review, spend the first 10 minutes reviewing what you did last time. In those 10 minutes, you've lost him. I say it's not the same. No, it's not the same. So that sort of led into the whole sort of area is ask the kids themselves what they think an effective teacher looks like. And so that's what that research came to be. It was actually asking students and asking bright students, what's more important to you in a teacher? Somebody who kind of has good social and emotional skills and kind of likes you get on with them and so on, or somebody who really knows their stuff and has that passion for communicating and teaching that stuff, and so on. And that became, and that actually became an international project because I did it initially in Australia, presented at an international conference, and I had some people come up and say, I'd like to replicate your study. And then we collaborated on that, and that kind of went in that direction. Okay, so that's almost out of time, so then you've got let me see. So this is where I guess is where we might kind of pick it up. So we're going to actually now, but this will be something to think about. I don't know how many people are coming back this afternoon for the 1 hour session this afternoon. But at least, obviously I'll share these slides. So, you can kind of go back and look at this. But perhaps we'll go on with this section this afternoon. And the idea was that we would do some small group work on this initially, but we would then share those ideas, and we would take one idea, right, one question, and see how we would develop that into a research, a piece of research, and so on. But open to any questions? Oh, we've got 5 minutes. This takes. I'm going to go to, we'll come back to that this afternoon. I'm going to go to the next one because she went to a lot of trouble. And hopefully this will work. And it's only 5 minutes. Oh, where is it? Oh, it should be a go button. Why is the go button?
Hello, my name's Elise and I'm a teacher and a researcher in the field of education. My teaching and my research have
Yeah,
always been very
I'll just pause it because it's not loud enough. Is there something else?
Or have, I guess, spanned across a range of contexts. I started out as a primary school teacher. My very first thesis was my honours thesis, which looked at how primary school students can create animations to explore social skills. And I was so interested, I guess, in the power of technology and student-created digital media that I went on, instead of going into the primary school setting full-time, I went on to explore research a little bit more in the university setting. And there were some projects that I was recruited to be part of that really looked at the design of animations and digital media for pre-service science educators. And I found that so interesting, particularly on.
So I'm just going to pause it. So essentially she was studying to be a teacher, a primary school teacher. One of the projects she became involved in as part of her undergraduate research was in designing media, interactive media for teaching science ideas. That she sort of is talking about how then that, being involved in that, led her to kind of go down a whole different path. She's talking about how this has taken her from that setting to actually researching within universities and so on. I don't know whether it's.
We looked at blended digital media and how different media forms that we use to communicate meaning and the ways that we blend those can represent different meaning and also impact on our learning. And I was so inspired by the insights that I had in that world to create a digital media intervention program that I went on to implement and research as part of my PhD. And I applied that to the context of a high school, and in particular a special education setting. And I worked with students in that setting who had autism, and they created a range of blended digital media. And it was an opportunity to really explore the design decisions that they made and the impact that their media creation had on their learning and also their communication skills. And throughout the last 10 years, I've continued to work in the university sector, and my interest in learning design has been realized through a range of roles. So for example, I've worked as an academic, as a teacher in education, but also as an academic developer and as an educational designer, where I've been able to work closely with a range of academics to support the design and delivery of various courses and subjects. I think my research in this space has been so interesting to me because I've always been really fascinated in the design decisions that people make to create learning experiences. And so lately I've been especially interested in blended learning because this has been a very big focus of my role. My team has been heavily involved in the development and the implementation of our university's blended learning strategy. And I've been able to analyse a range of data from staff and student surveys about their experiences creating blended learning experiences. And it's presented some very interesting information that has informed the strategy and also the support service model available to assist our staff with improving practice in that area. But it's also raised a lot of questions that I'm really interested in exploring through research related to the complexity of learning design in synchronous and asynchronous experiences. So we've seen a lot of really great things come out of the time that staff have had to explore more with online teaching. And we've seen really great things happen in the online synchronous or online asynchronous space. one of the things that we know is key to creating a quality blended learning experience is the connection of those worlds. So the connection of the synchronous, be it online or on campus experience, with the asynchronous online experience. If these things are separate and not connected, it has an impact on the student experience. And this is coming through a lot from our students via various feedback mechanisms. So it is something I'm really interested in exploring. So it's a research question of interest for me at the moment around what are some of the things that impact our design decisions, what are quality connected experiences, how do you create that connection, and also what are some of the assumptions I think we make as teachers, because that's the other thing that I've seen is a lot of the things we think about having a good impact on our students aren't necessarily connected with what the students are saying about their experiences as well. So lots to explore there, and I think ways to motivate myself to have involvement in research that's connected to my teaching is to surround myself with like-minded colleagues who have similar curiosity and perhaps join informal teaching circles and communities of practice or apply for grants because these are all ways that, at least for me, they hold me accountable and keep me on track with different goals and milestones that I have for research. And the other thing too is there are so many different ways that you can disseminate your research. So I think publications are fantastic and very important, but I've also been much more active lately in the conference space and in professional articles as well. And I think, yeah, it's important to see how your research and your teaching can be and are connected. I think research into scholarship of teaching and learning is very important. Not only does it increase your research activity, but ultimately it makes you a much more reflective practitioner. It helps you to refine your teaching practice, which has an impact on your teaching community around you, and ultimately creates a much more positive, hopefully, student experience for your students.
Okay, good place to stop. So essentially, the key messages there is how she brought it together, but actually how her research that then led to particular teaching kinds of practices and those in combination actually then led her into a significant governance role where she's responsible for developing the whole strategy of blended learning for the University of Wollongong and so on. So it's kind of that full circle, but there were some key things: collaboration, connectedness, talking to colleagues, surrounding yourself, being part of these teaching and learning circles to discuss things, and from those sort of relevant research questions can arise. Okay, we'll leave it there. For those of you who need to run off and do other things and won't be back this afternoon, thank you so much. I look forward to continuing the conversation online, and hope to see many of you at the conference in November. So the UOW Global Collaborator Conference will be here. The 5th to the 7th of November. Save the date because it's going to be amazing. Okay. Otherwise, I'll send the rest of you this afternoon. Thank you.
So we just get here to have a photography sessions. Yeah. Come. Yeah.